Welcome to our new video, Korean War, 45 rare photos colorized and brought to life. Now the forgotten war is revealed. Before we continue with this incredible journey through history, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Your support helps us bring more colorized historical content to life. Now let's dive into the forgotten war that changed everything. In the frozen mountains of Korea, where winter winds cut like razors and summer heat shimmered off rice paddies, a conflict began that would define the Cold War and forever change American warfare. The Korean War, America's forgotten war, stands as one of the most brutal conflicts of the 20th century, claiming over 36,000 American lives and setting the template for every limited war that followed. It started on June 25, 1950, when North Korean tanks rolled across the 38th parallel like thunder breaking the dawn. Within hours, the Cold War had turned hot, and President Truman faced a decision that would thrust America into its first major conflict since World War II. What began as a police action became a grinding war that would test the resolve of the free world. The faces in these photographs tell the story no history book can capture. Farm boys from Iowa standing beside factory workers from Detroit. West Point graduates next to World War II veterans. They carried M1 Garands in hopes of quick victory, letters from home, and the confidence of a nation that had never lost a war. These were America's sons, sent to fight in a peninsula most had never heard of. The Korean landscape became a proving ground where East met West in deadly embrace. Ancient villages were reduced to rubble in days. Children learned to recognize incoming artillery instead of playing in schoolyards. Farmers became refugees, carrying everything they owned as armies swept across their homeland like deadly tides. In these photographs, we witness extraordinary courage amid unimaginable hardship. A medic working to save wounded soldiers in sub-zero temperatures. Marines sharing rations with Korean orphans. Young soldiers writing letters from frozen foxholes, trying to explain a conflict that seemed to have no clear purpose. The war's early months were a roller coaster, unlike anything in American military history. MacArthur's brilliant Incheon landing turned the tide in September 1950, and victory seemed within grasp. UN forces raced northward toward the Chinese border, chasing a defeated enemy and dreaming of home by Christmas. But China had other plans. In November 1950, as winter began to bite, 300,000 Chinese volunteers poured across the Yalu like a human avalanche. American forces found themselves fighting for their lives in the longest retreat in U.S. military history. The Chosin Reservoir became legend, 17 days of fighting in minus 30-degree temperatures, where frostbite was as deadly as enemy bullets. The photographs from Chosin tell a story of survival that defies belief. Marines with faces blackened by cold and gunpowder, their rifles frozen solid, their determination unbroken. Corpsmen tending, wounded with hands so cold they could barely feel bandages. Soldiers huddling around tiny fires, sharing whatever warmth they could find in a landscape designed to kill. The Korean winter became an enemy unto itself. Men carried extra socks inside jackets to keep them from freezing. Machine guns seized up in the cold. Blood plasma froze before reaching wounded soldiers. Yet somehow, incredibly, they endured and fought on, writing new chapters in American military courage. As the war settled into its second year, the conflict took on the character of World War I, a grinding stalemate of trenches and hills where men died for ground that would be abandoned the next week. Porkchop Hill, Heartbreak Ridge, Old Baldy, these became symbols of a war that seemed to have no end. The medical innovations pioneered in Korea revolutionized battlefield care forever. MASH units brought life-saving surgery closer to the front lines than ever before. Helicopter evacuations became routine. The photographs of these medical heroes show dedication that transcended nationality. Doctors and nurses working around the clock to save lives regardless of uniform. Behind the front lines, a different war raged in the corridors of power. General MacArthur wanted to expand the conflict, to bomb China and use nuclear weapons if necessary. Truman, fearing World War III, insisted on keeping the war limited. Their clash reached its climax in April 1951 when Truman fired America's most famous general, proving that civilian authority reigned supreme even in wartime. The Korean conflict introduced the world to limited war, where the goal was not total victory, but political objectives achieved through controlled violence. It was a concept that would define Cold War conflicts, recognition that in a nuclear age, some wars could never be won in the traditional sense. The war showcased international cooperation on an unprecedented scale. 16 nations contributed combat forces to the UN command. Photographs show American soldiers fighting alongside Turks, Australians treating British wounded, Filipino medics saving Greek lives. It was the United Nations in action, the first time the world body would wage war to preserve peace. As negotiations dragged on at Panmunjom, soldiers continued dying for hills that existed on no strategic map. The talks became warfare by other means, with every seating arrangement the subject of bitter dispute. Meanwhile, young men from both sides faced each other across no man's land, separated by yards and an ideology that seemed worth dying for. The armistice finally came on July 27, 1953, not with victory parades but with exhausted relief. The guns fell silent along the 38th parallel, almost exactly where the war had begun 3 years earlier. Korea remained divided, families remained separated, and 36,000 American families had empty chairs at dinner tables. Korean War veterans came home to a nation that barely acknowledged their sacrifice. No ticker tape parades, no grand welcome home. They had fought in a war that was not quite a war, for an outcome that was not quite a victory. They became known as veterans of the forgotten war. And for too long, that's exactly what they were. Today, these photographs serve as testimony to their courage and sacrifice. In every face, we see the cost of the Cold War's first hot battle. We see young men who answered their country's call without question, who fought in impossible conditions for ideals they believed in. We see the birth of modern military medicine and the emergence of America as the world's policeman. The Korean War established the template for every American military intervention that followed. It showed that wars could be fought for limited objectives, that nuclear weapons could be possessed but not used, and that the price of freedom was constant vigilance on distant frontiers. The legacy of Korea lives on in the DMZ that still divides the peninsula, in the US-South Korea alliance, and in the memory of those who served. The war may have been forgotten by the public, but never by those who fought it, who knew they had participated in something larger than themselves. These images from Korea remind us that freedom is never free, that democracy must sometimes be defended with blood. In the frozen hills of Korea, a generation learned these hard truths and paid the ultimate price to preserve them. Their story, told through these haunting photographs, must never be forgotten. For in forgetting their sacrifice, we risk repeating their suffering.